No.
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Have you been using their
Ramen
consultant
was-
ahead of time?
Okay.
Preliminary
We're
analysis?
never taking 10 million.
We had a bunch of streets.
Good morning, everyone.
What was that?
For those here today that are representing our member towns, please join us at the table.
It's not my coffee. Somebody else, you're sitting there. So I get to go back there.
Please silence your phones.
Gracias.
And before we move into the presentation, if I may, I would like to have each of the member towns representatives here today to please identify themselves. So from Bloomfield, East Hartford,
Morning, everybody. Mayor Connor Martin. Thanks for having me.
Doug Wilson, Town Engineer.
And Alex Trujillo, Director of Public Works.
and from Hartford.
Frank Del Ripo, City Engineer. Sorry, Chris.
All right, James, what hat do you have on this morning?
I'm in my capacity as Chief of Staff to the Mayor of Hartford, Mayor Ruben
Right,
Arulapa.
I'm gonna send some confirmation
Director of Public Works. Thank you. And Rocky Hill?
thought today, is that good?
Via Zoom.
Thank you. And West Hartford?
Greg Summer, West Hartford Town Engineer, and I believe Rick Ledwith, Town Manager, is also virtually attending.
And Mayor Cantor is too.
Thank
Morning,
you.
everyone.
And Weathersfield?
Derek Greger, Town Engineer.
And Windsor?
Suzanne Choate, Town Engineer, and I believe Peter Souza is also joining us via Zoom.
All right, thank you all very much for coming. We believe that this concept is something, we're planting the seed right now, but I think you're going to find the presentation both interesting and offering a lot. It's a rather long presentation, but it's something that we believe needs to be put out there as we move forward. We think it's something that in the long term will be beneficial to all of our member towns. But with that, I'll turn the meeting over to our CEO, Scott Jellison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for everybody being here. We've been talking about this topic for a long time, especially with the DPWs and the engineering departments of our towns. Really since 2016. And our whole goal here is we don't want to anyone to take away any discussions we have today that it's adversarial against our towns. We simply want to show our towns what we believe is lessons learned. The MDC has spent $1.8 billion to date, and we're going to spend another $45 million every year thereafter, forever, to address stormwater in our sewer pipes, rather than getting the stormwater out of our sewer pipes. So we believe this MS4 permitting process, which really began, and we'll talk about the details, began in 2005 and then updated in 2017. This is the catalyst for the next Clean Water Act. I was in Providence last week, and EPA admitted, and DEEP has admitted, that they realize that building big stormwater tunnels is not the solution to the Clean Water Act. They realize that building big capacity, you're just collecting more and more stormwater, but you're not going at it and taking it from the source. And what proves that is they have given us an extra $180 million in North Hartford to do exactly what the MDC has been talking about for a long time. Don't build big tunnels, don't build bigger pipes, simply get the stormwater out of the sewer system. And that's going to be the model for this country. And if we don't do something with stormwater, just think about it. The majority of our money that we're spending moving forward, we've already spent $1.8 billion, is going to be working in Hartford, separating. We'll be doing lining in our other towns, but lining only removes less than 10% of the problem. The majority of the problem from the other 7 towns is inflow from high groundwater tables, which is no town's fault. But the high groundwater is coming into the MDC system in a couple of ways. The leaky pipes, that's our fault. We got to fix that, but that's only less than 10% of the problem. The other water is coming in by being pumped in or gravity fed from homes, businesses. And so as we spend that 45 million, every town here is paying for it, but we're not putting any new pipes in the ground for the other 7 towns. So we're just status quo in the other 7 towns. And Hartford is continuing to grow with new storm systems by separation. So we're going to get into the facts. It's a long presentation. Bear with us. It's really, really important because what we're trying to do is and I've said this to EPA and to DEEP, unfortunately, the MDC has become very, very, very smart about this topic. Why? It's because we spent $1.8 billion of your money. And so what we realize is let's not spend the next $2 billion on continuing to make the same mistake. Imagine if we spent $1.8 billion to date on stormwater systems in our other 7 towns to get rid of inflow. Can you imagine what your towns would look like and all the problems you wouldn't have if we did that? Now, that's not your fault. That's not our fault. It's the regulators' fault, unfortunately, that they wanted us to do X and we had to do it fast, right? But that's what the presentation is about. And we have CDM with us, who does a lot of engineering work for ourselves and other towns. And Emily's here to do the presentation on the MS4 component of it. And then Jason Waterbury is going to take over and talk about how the systems are interconnected and how water flows through each town. And Chris Levesque's going to talk about how development is being, in a sense, stifled in certain cases because of stormwater, not just in our towns, but everywhere. And then we'll talk about what else we can do. And Matt Hart and Heidi are here from CROG to talk about what they're going to be doing with stormwater management master planning for the CROG towns. So with that, Emily, why don't you go right ahead?
All right, let's get started. All right, thank you. Not working. I tried the arrows and the clicker. Oh, you got it going. All right, here's an agenda for the topics we're going to cover this morning. Scott gave us some introductions, and I'm going to do an overview of the MS4 program. That'll be followed by impacts of stormwater on the MDC member towns and a discussion of stormwater regionalization. So the term MS4 stands for Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, and the permit governs discharges from town drainage systems. The permit comes from the Federal Clean Water Act requirements, and the goal of the program is to improve the water quality of local streams and rivers by reducing the pollutants in the stormwater flow. As areas have developed, urban areas have increased runoff, and the increased runoff picks up pollutants as the rain flows over the hard surfaces. So here's a figure that shows an undeveloped area and a developed area. So the most important numbers on here is that in a natural environment, there's only about 10% of runoff during a rainstorm. Then the area gets urbanized and it can be more in the area of 55% runoff. So you have a larger quantity of water that you're dealing with that needs to go into storm drain systems. And also there's the opportunity to pick up pollutants. So here's a slide showing some common pollutants. There's everything from the sand and the salt in the roadway, construction site runoff, yard waste. It can be leaves, it can be grass, it can be a variety of things. There's fertilizers and pesticides, animal waste, oil and grease if cars are leaking on the roadways and it washes into the storm drains, general litter, and all of these can be washed into the nearby water bodies without treatment. So the goal here with the permit is that we want to be proactive and get these pollutants before they enter the storm drain system. This slide gives a little, some dates on the MS4 permit in Connecticut. So the first permit was in 2004. That permit expired, and then in 2017, a new permit went into effect. We're essentially still working with that permit. It was reissued and extended to September of 2025. The DEEP has said that they're working on an updated permit, and they hope to release that by the end of the year. The MDC currently does not play a major role in the MS4 permit. In the city of Hartford, they do assist with catch basin maintenance and outfall sampling. And they were, both the MDC and the city were notified recently by EPA that they're not in compliance with the permit terms. So they've asked that the city and the MDC come up with an MOU.
And I just wanted to say this, we're only showing this because this is a very important thing that's happening. North Hartford, what happened in North Hartford opened the eyes of the regulators. Our original consent order with the state of Connecticut didn't even address stormwater backing up into homes. So what happened in North Hartford opened the eyes of the regulators and even EPA looking down on DEEP saying, what are you guys doing in Connecticut? So this is the start. We're dealing with it in Hartford, and we've made great progress working with the city on this. But all of our towns are going to be dealing with this. This is not just a Hartford MDC issue. Unfortunately, the other 7 towns are on their own. The Hartford has MDC to help them in this because it's a CSO community. But this is coming to your neighborhood. Why? Because, as I said earlier, EPA and DEEP realize that inflows, stormwater from basements, groundwater from basements is really the problem. And so they'll say, okay, you don't need to build a big storm pipe. You don't need to build a CSO pipe, but you got to get the inflow out. And where's the inflow coming from? It's coming from the other 7 towns. Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks for adding that in. I just want to mention in the other member towns, the MDC has a very limited role, but when there are illicit connections between the sewer and the catch basins or the storm drains, they will assist in those cases. Here, kind of what Scott's mentioning, enforcement. Right now, all the MS4 towns are required to do is report annually, but we are aware there are cities in the state that have MS4 consent decrees with EPA and DEEP, so they have additional challenges there. And last year, EPA also visited Hartford and took samples. So that's the letter that went both to the city and the MDC with showing that there was exceedances found. All right, so now I'm going to get into a general description on the MS4 permit. So they call them minimum control measures. So there's 6 minimum control measures, which are ways that the towns can control the pollutants getting into the stormwater. So the first one is public education and outreach. So here the towns provide information to residents and to businesses, informing people that the actions that they take are polluting the nearby waterways. Typically, towns have a web page, and will also have brochures and mailings available to try to change the way people act in order to reduce pollution. All right, so the cost, it's a pretty low cost to start the program, maybe $8,000 to get the website set up and some documentation available at town buildings, libraries, and then approximately $10,000 per year for the town to maintain the program and do mailings to targeted areas. Minimum control measure 2 is public participation and involvement. This builds on public outreach that you're actually trying to engage people. So if there is the requirement that the stormwater management plan and the annual reports are made available for public comment. They're also open to the towns to come up with ways that they can engage their community. The MDC works with towns on the household hazardous waste collection days. Towns collect yard waste, put signs up in parks, and work with local groups to educate the public. The startup cost is around $2,000 per year per town, and the annual cost about $8,000. It's varying on what approaches the town takes to engage the public. The next minimum control measure is illicit discharge detection and elimination. So this is a really big piece of the permit. This is where we're going out into the system and trying to find places that pollutants are getting into the storm drain system. Some key components to this minimum control measure are listed. First, the towns need to have legal authority. So they need to update their regulations so that they can implement the MS4 requirements. Another big piece of this is they need detailed storm drainage mapping. So every structure, every manhole, every catch basin, every pipe, every outfall, they all need to be typically mapped in GIS so that we can keep track of the system. And then there's the effort to go into the system and find the illicit connections. Once they find illicit connections, the town need to use their regulations to enforce them. So on the next slide, I'm going to give an example of how complicated this process is. So this is a typical process for if we suspect there's a connection between the sewer system and the storm drain system. So first, we do outfall screening and sampling during both dry and wet weather. So the challenge here is there's hundreds of outfalls in each town. Estimate that the member towns together have around 3,000 outfalls. Next, once we've done the outfall testing, we go into the system and test key structures. Basically, we go to manholes, we go to catch basins, we go to outfalls, and we do test kits and sampling to try to find where the illicit connection is coming from, where the bacteria or the chlorine or the ammonia comes from. So this is a big challenge here, is that it takes a lot of time to do this, and also that's where this comprehensive mapping comes into play. Next, based on that investigation, we try to narrow down where we think the illicit connection is, and commonly we'll CCTV the drains. So in this, we may find direct connections of pipes going into the storm drain system, and we can also look for cracking, because sometimes the connection between the systems is indirect and can be harder to find, where a sewer pipe could be leaking through the ground into a drainage pipe. So after the CCTV, we identify buildings that appear to be connected to the system or possibly connected and do dye testing within the buildings. So here, a big challenge is access. You need to contact the owners and do testing within the house. And then even within the house, it's not as simple as putting dye in one sink or one fixture, because often it's an attachment to the building. Often we find that it'll just be one bathroom's connected or one floor drain. So you have to comprehensively inspect and dye test these buildings. Then once you've identified the connections, you go to the owner and you ask them to remove it. So this is your enforcement piece. It can be expensive to remove it, and sometimes there's a challenge there. And then the whole IDD process is repetitive. Once you remove an illicit connection, you test to see if the program was successful. And then the permit also has a 5-year follow-up for all catchment investigations. So here, the cost of the program is dependent on the drainage system size and the extent of the pollutants. We did review the 2022 annual reports that the towns put online to get an idea of progress, and found that for this, the startup costs, which includes the mapping and the baseline dry weather outfall screening for towns at this point, is going to range from $25,000 to $250,000 to come up to compliance. And then the recurring cost to do all these IDD investigations, we're looking at something on the order of $200,000 to $400,000 per year per town. And as you're mentioning, the member towns have 3,000 stormwater outfalls. All right, moving on to minimum control measure 4. This is construction site stormwater runoff and control. So the issue here is that during construction, polluted stormwater runs off from construction sites and often flows into storm drain systems and gets into water bodies. So what the MS4 permit action items they're looking for is for the towns to establish regulations for proper erosion and sedimentation control. And as developers come in, the town will review the site plans and make sure they meet those requirements. And then during construction, the town will go out and conduct site inspections and take enforcement actions as needed. Just want to mention that the Connecticut guideline for soil erosion and sedimentation control, that's the little picture there, that was recently updated. The new version came up into effect of March of this year, and that covers a lot of the requirements. Here's a couple photos kind of just showing during a rainstorm, this site didn't have proper control, so you can see the dirt flowing down the street into the catch basins and into the nearby water bodies. So the startup expense for this minimum control measure would be related kind of internally to how much it costs the town to get the regulations in place, and then about $30,000 a year for reviewing the site plans and conducting inspections. Our next minimum control measure is post-construction site runoff control. So the idea here is that when a site is going to be developed or redeveloped, it's an opportunity to improve the stormwater conditions at the site. So the towns need to establish regulations that require the developers to treat the stormwater and store the stormwater on site. Again, the state recently updated the manual, the Connecticut Stormwater Quality Manual. That went into effect March of this year. That has more of the MS4 requirements. One of the challenges with this is that the towns require developers to put in detention basins and storm scepter units, and those items all require maintenance. So either the town needs to enforce that these private systems are being maintained, or they're not going to meet their use, and that's where you get into enforcement. So the cost for this minimum control measure, again, the startup is related to town updating their regulations, and then a recurring annual cost on the range of $20,000 to $50,000. The last minimum control measure is pollution prevention and good housekeeping. This covers quite a variety of topics for keeping the town clean and reducing pollution, and then also maintaining the system. So I've listed kind of the key items here. The catch basin program is a big program. The towns need to inspect the catch basins and set up a cleaning program. No catch basin sump should ever be more than 50% full, so it's a process of learning about the system and then setting up a program to regularly clean the catch basins. The streets need to be swept at least annually, and it's the same sort of thing where the town should set up, understand their system and know which areas need to be swept frequently and which could be on more of an annual basis. And the two kind of play in together. If you do more street sweeping, perhaps you have to do less catch basin cleaning. The next one is an asset management system. The MS4 permit does require that towns maintain and repair their infrastructure. So they need to make sure that the catch basins, manholes, outfalls, pipes are all in good condition. And the last one is a really big item for towns, is reducing the amount of directly connected impervious area, DCIA. So the idea here is that towns reduce the amount of impervious surfaces they have, and we have a few more slides on this. So here's the figure just showing that as the impervious cover goes up, so does the runoff. And at this point, the towns are required to be reducing the impervious area by 1% per year. And then here's a little bit more language from the permit describing the process. First, the towns were to set up a baseline DCIA. So they actually figure out an acreage of impervious area for their town. And then, as I mentioned, by the fourth year of the permit, they should be reducing this acreage by 1%. And at this time, 3% should have been completed. This has a very high cost for the communities. We have some numbers coming up. And to give you an idea on how the towns can achieve this, first they can look for, through regulation, requiring that developers reduce the DCIA. If you can get a developer coming into town to meet this for you, it's basically a no-cost solution. The next is if you already have public projects underway, you can incorporate some DCIA reduction and do this at a lower cost. Once you've kind of tried both of those, you get into what they call retrofit projects, which are projects where the intent is to meet this DCIA reduction. So here is a summary of the 8 member towns based on both internet. The CT NEMO has information on impervious cover and also reviewing annual reports. But altogether, the 8 member towns have about 15,000 acres of baseline DCIA. And so every year, we should be reducing that by 1%, so that's 151 acres per year. At this time, we should be around 453 acres removed, and as of the 2022 annual reports, we're only at 3 acres.
Emily, so let me just, so lessons learned. We spent $1.8 billion and it took us 50 years. The Clean Water Act, 1972, and finally in 2008, we started doing something about it. This is setting the stage for our towns to see a consent order, consent decree. This is looking through the forest, through the trees. This is what, without sampling, the more our towns don't comply, the more data. The one way EPA works is they're doing it right now with lead and copper rule. They test, they create data, they utilize the data to develop regulations. So this is scary to look at these numbers for our towns. I think that this regulation is almost impossible to meet. But we spent $1.8 billion to remove a 1-year level of control. Think about that. A 1-year level of control, the EPA made us spend $1.8 billion. And Boston only spent $900 million. They serve 60 communities, we serve 8. So EPA doesn't care about whether or not the regulation is unrealistic. But this is a really scary chart for the towns to think about what your towns have not done yet to comply with a regulation that came into effect in 2017. Sorry, Emily.
Yep, thank you.
Emily, if I could, I apologize to everyone here, including the commissioners. We had a bit of a snafu this morning, but as you can see, the presentation is being printed now, and as soon as the copies come off, we'll be distributing them to everyone. Thank you.
So there's a lot of options for reducing DCIA. I kind of already mentioned getting developers to do it. Down at the end of the slide, you could do road narrowing, you could do detention basins. Green infrastructure is something that the state's very interested in. And so green infrastructure is also called low impact development. So here are some projects that could be done. You could add rain gardens, bioretention basins, pervious pavement, green roofs, grass swales. There's a variety of these types of options for on a smaller scale dealing with the DCIA requirement. For this type of choice, for these low-impact projects, the average construction cost is $250,000 per acre, and then the average annual maintenance cost is $6,000 per acre. I just want to touch again on the asset management, because this is a big program as well. The town should be inspecting the stormwater infrastructure to know if the pipes, manholes, catch basins are in good condition. So this will be a big CCTV program as well as tracking so that they can repair the system. And just want to touch on, stricter regulations are always coming. Now there's kind of a struggle with disposal. You got the catch basin debris and the decant wastewater from the catch basins that are becoming more challenging to dispose of, often requiring dewatering at a separate site. So here's some costs for the minimum control measure 6. So those DCIA reduction projects are really dominant on these costs, but the startup cost to come to compliance is in the order of $3.5 to $6 million per town. And then the annual cost going forward to cover that DCIA reduction, catch basin cleaning, asset management is in the order of $2.5 to $4 million per town. And as we're kind of mentioning that things are related, so the catch basins, if you clean those more often, you'll prevent debris getting into the system and reduce the pollutants getting into the stream. So long-term, having these maintenance programs will help with your results.
And just to add to that, so some towns might decide it's cheaper for me to clean the streets than it is to clean the catch basins, or vice versa. But remember, whatever you do, and if you decide to not clean the streets, proactive, right? This is all about being proactive. If you decide not to clean the streets first and just clean the catch basins, that means you're testing as well. You're 3,000 outfalls. you're creating data. And every data that you create that shows bad results, EPA is putting it in your future consent order. So it's a really important, when you decide, yeah, it might be cheaper to clean the catch basin more often, but if you clean the streets more often, you're not creating the water quality testing problems at the testing points at the outfalls. Sorry.
Yep, those are great points, Scott. And I have here, kind of fitting in with that, this is a kind of a detailed list of the outfall and interconnection requirements. They kind of fall under a couple categories, but there's both wet weather and dry weather requirements. The outfalls that discharge directly to impaired waters have more requirements, and the IDDE program is a 10-year program, so by the end of 2027, towns should have done those catchment investigations. In most cases, it's townwide for the member towns. And this data is all being sent to DEEP annually so they can see your progress. They know where your outfalls are. They know if you have clean outfalls or exceedances and what follow-up work you're doing. And the word interconnection, I guess I'll just touch on that briefly. So we estimated 3,000 outfalls where the stormwater discharges through a pipe into a water body that everyone's familiar with. The interconnection is where two MS4s meet. And in most cases for the towns, it's where the town MS4 system discharges into the state MS4 system. So the town pipe goes into a state road. And that location where it discharges is called an interconnection, and those are to be treated as outfalls as well. So all the requirements of sampling and IDDE are required at those points. And I feel like a lot of towns are still working on the mapping of those and coordinating with the DOT. So the cost for towns to come to compliance is in the order of $100,000 to $250,000, and then going forward, the outfall sampling cost is around $75,000 to $100,000 per year. And so, kind of compiling all those numbers that were spread out through the presentation, we came up with it's about $41 million for the towns to come up to compliance, and then going forward, about $31 million per year to maintain compliance. I think that's the end of my slides. Let me just check.
Thank you, Emily. Jason Waterbury from MDC is Assistant Manager of Engineering. He's going to give the presentation on the impacts to member towns.
Thank you, Scott. So before I start off, this slide shows a good picture of a separated system. Some of these concepts will come up throughout the presentation. As you're aware, within Hartford, it's predominantly combined, which means that storm drain doesn't exist. All those other connections go to one pipe, dry weather flow, one pipe. However, outside of Hartford, which is basically the seven other member towns, you've got this setup where you've got your storm drainage, has its own dedicated system owned by that particular member town, and then you've got this collection system owned by the district. A couple interesting notes on this slide, which is very useful, it's been used in other presentations, is all those what I call defects that are shown, whether it be in the storm drainage or in the sewer system. You'll see little cracks or roots or connections to like a roof leader. Those are defects in the sewer system. That's where non-sewer flow gets into the system, whether it's groundwater coming in, that's infiltration, or if it's a hard pipe coming in from like a sump pump or a roof leader, that's inflow. So that's how the majority of our system works right now throughout the other 7 towns.
Jay,
Yep.
before you move, and this is the ironic part, right? Hartford is a CSO community, one pipe. Now we're changing that. We're going to separate everything, and we'll have brand new storm pipes over the next 50 years. But the majority of our 7 towns don't have the storm pipe, but they're supposed to, because it's a separated sewer system regulated by EPA. So what happens when there's no storm pipe in a separated storm system regulated by EPA, not the state of Connecticut? The water comes into MDC system through basements, through foundation drains, through rain gutters, and that's part of the problem. There's no storm pipe everywhere in our other 7 towns. Go ahead, Jay.
Thank you, Scott. So if you were to build a new development today. This is how you would build it, and this is how it would function. Sanitary goes to sanitary sewer, storm drainage goes to storm drain, which ends up in a waterway. Obviously, the sanitary sewer eventually ends up at the treatment plant. No defects, no cracks, completely, perfect system. Unfortunately, our system is not perfect. This is how you end up with numbers such as shown on this slide. This is probably, some of you have probably seen this picture before at other presentations, where in each town you've got two numbers shown on the screen. I'll use Bloomfield as an example, 2 MGD. What that means is on a dry weather day, 2 million gallons a day comes from Bloomfield. Greatly matches the water sales plus some low-level infiltration. However, on a stormy wet weather day, that number can get up to 11 million gallons a day. So that's that extra stormwater that's coming into our system. Right now, that when you add it up across all of the district's 8-member towns, that adds millions of dollars a year in extra transport and treatment costs. Now, unfortunately, as we proceed through our consent decree work and consent of work and get this water out of our system, the water just doesn't disappear. Whether it means extra groundwater elevating the groundwater table, or somehow it has to get connected to a storm drainage system. It's kind of like that picture from middle school that we all probably remember from science with the water cycle. We don't wave a wand, it doesn't just go away. So as we get it out of our system, it's going into something else, whether it be the town's stormwater system or a water body or whatnot. But even that, which I'll get to, affects everyone. So this picture on the screen, which it'll come up on another couple slides and blown up, but it's also shown in the room on a couple boards. It shows that no town in our district is 100% contained to itself. There's none of us in this room that have, none of my stormwater goes to someone else, and I'm not getting stormwater from another town. Every single town in this room has stormwater going from its town into someone else, or from another town into its borders. So that's starting to paint the picture of, you can't just view it as I'm only going to handle my problem. I'm only going to deal with the flooding or whatnot in my streets. It's going to end up in another member town. It's going to impact someone else. There's a reference on this slide to the North Branch Drainage Study, which I'll get to in another couple slides. So this is just two blow-ups of water going from one member town, or two, into another. The one on the left shows stormwater coming from West Hartford in the purple, Newington in the purple, up to West Hartford. West Hartford's stormwater is the green on this screen, and then eventually discharging into the South Branch Park River in Hartford. And that's important. I'll come up with that in another couple slides. But additionally, you have stormwater from Weathersfield, shown in the brown, also going into the South Branch Park River. So right now, the South Branch Park River is handling stormwater from West Hartford, Newington, and Weathersfield. And then the slide on the right, you have the orange, which is Bloomfield. So its stormwater flow is coming either into West Hartford or into Hartford. It eventually does get to Hartford. And then you have stormwater from West Hartford flowing into Bloomfield and then again into Hartford. Now, where it discharges in Hartford ultimately is either Gully Brook, which is the middle part of that screen, or the North Branch Park River. North Branch Park River, Gully Brook, and the South Branch Park River all eventually end up in the Hartford flood control system. Now, as Emily kind of focused on in the MS4 presentation, MS4's priority is pollutant control.
I have a minute to go home. I have to get something for somebody that's coming down.
Hot mic.
Right.
Okay. As Emily mentioned in her presentation, MS4 is primarily focused on pollutant control. It is not focused on street flooding. MS4 doesn't care about street flooding. Obviously, there's activities within MS4 that can cause more street flooding to occur, but the regulation itself is not focused on street flooding. However, as many of you in this room know, the complaint that you're going to hear from the public is flooding. Whether it's yard flooding, street flooding, that's the complaint you're going to hear most commonly with regards to stormwater. So as some of you go ahead and as some member towns decide, I want to initiate a stormwater project to fix flooding in this intersection, you have to realize and remember that water eventually is going to end up in another town. Most likely, for majority of our towns, it ends up in Hartford. But as that happens, it's going to end up there. Now, there are areas of our system where we've actually tried, and I'll mention in a couple slides why we did this, but we tried to do some projects to get stormwater out of our system. And we were specifically told in a couple cases that we couldn't do that project or those projects because the existing stormwater infrastructure was full. The examples noted on here are Jordan Lane along Folly Brook, where that stormwater system could not handle the disconnection, the inflow disconnection, the removal of some pumps and foundation drains that we needed to do. So we basically had to do a project without doing that piece of the work. In similar fashion, Steel Road in West Hartford, at the time, we were told by town staff that, nope, our storm drainage infrastructure is taxed already. We can't handle additional water coming to us from as you do your disconnection work. So again, we had to punt on that project. This screen shows a good example of what happens as the result of when stormwater flows from, actually an example of stormwater impacts at the downstream end from other towns. The outfalls shown on the left are on the North Branch Park River. They're located just west of Granby Street off of Mark Twain Drive. They are actually two CSOs, so two combined sewer overflows that we have in our system. They're actually two CSOs that we have to completely eliminate per our consent order. The outfalls on the left they flow great if they have to on a low river day. However, on days when it's extreme wet weather and a lot of drainage coming from upstream, that river has a very high, quick peak. And that's what happens in the pictures on the right. Those pictures on the right are the same exact locations on the left. Now, when the river is that high, the overflow cannot function. Those pipes can't discharge to the river. It doesn't have enough head, as you would say, behind it to actually push out into the river in most cases. So what that means is either the CSO is sitting in the pipe and kind of building up, stacking in the queue, shall we say, until the river discharge or river elevation comes down, or it's backing up into the adjacent system. And more importantly, those outfalls are tied to storm drainage, local storm drainage in Hartford as well. So that storm drainage also cannot get out of the system because the river is high. The river's high because a lot of water is coming to it, and as I showed in a couple slides ago, that location is taking drainage from Bloomfield and West Hartford, as well as parts of Hartford. So this is just another everyone's in this party together kind of concept.
Jay,
Yep.
before you leave, so this is really important, right? This is a highway for water. Jay mentioned the towns that flow into Hartford: Newington, Bloomfield, Weathersfield, West Hartford. It's ironic that those same towns are part of the Hartford Flood Commission. Why? Right? There's a reason. There's a reason why. Because these waterways are highways to get water out of our towns. And if you go back to the slide, Jay, on the pictures, why should, and I'm going to use East Hartford or any town as an example, why should East Hartford or any other town care what happens in this river that we see these pictures? Here's the reason. I call it taxation without representation. There's two options here. We're doing a study on this river. We need this river to exit our stormwater that we're separating in North Hartford and discharge it. And as Jay mentioned, we do everything by gravity. That's why the MDC's rates are so low, right? But if this river is too high in wet weather conditions for all the things we just got talking about, we're going to have to pump it. And dredging the river is $50 million. A pump station is $100 million, plus the maintenance associated with pump stations forever and ever. More importantly, EPA has already told the city of Hartford they can't give you CSO money for dredging a river. It's a flood control issue. And they've told us we can't give you $100 million for a pump station because it's a stormwater pump station. It's a flood control pump station once we separate it. So City of Hartford can't afford the $50 million, but taxation without representation, if we don't have that water body, MDC is going to build a pump station, $100 million, and all of you are going to pay for it without any representation because we have to, right? And so that's where we are. We don't have any choices. And if we don't address this global issue as an 8-member town and think it's someone else's problem, you're going to pay for it no matter whether you realize it or not. And so this is a major problem. This is right around the corner. This summer, we need to make a decision as a body, as our towns, what are we gonna do? Because the drainage study is gonna be complete, and we need to move forward. And it's either dredging the river or spending $100 million in designing a pump station. Go ahead, Jay.
Thank you. As Scott mentioned, the Hartford flood control system is managed basically by 4 towns. So this is already an example of at least half of our member towns acting in a regional body with a regional responsibility for stormwater control throughout, in the system as it goes from the outskirts, say in Newington or West Hartford or Bloomfield, eventually to the Connecticut River. Now, one interesting thing on this slide is you'll see basically these are the assets that are considered the flood control system. In purple are the South Branch and North Branch Park Rivers. Those are the open channel pieces of the system. And then you've got the conduits, which is kind of that powder blue color, whether it be the Park River conduit or the auxiliary conduit, which is the PRAC, the Park River Auxiliary Conduit. There's also a series of pump stations located along those conduits. They trigger when the Connecticut River is at certain elevations. Most of them work, the Bushnell Park Pump Station and the Keeney Lane Pump Station, the ones that function most of the time. The Armory and Pope really barely ever come on, if not at all. Now, using Bushnell as an example, its main purpose is to pump local drainage into the conduit. So when the conduit is high, or the Connecticut River is high, it's kicking on and sending that local drainage from the city of Hartford into the conduit because it can't get there by gravity. Now, as other towns develop and send more water down the pipeline, whether it be the North Branch Park River or South Branch Park River, that Park River conduit will be impacted, which will have some impact on the Bushnell Park pump station as it has to come on either longer or more frequently. When we did our long-term control plan update back in 2018, that was approved in 2022, there was a large focus of in that plan of rehab of our system. That was kind of the initial thing that we wanted to do. We have approximately 1,220 miles of sewer system throughout our 8 member towns. This plan included the rehab of a minimum of 400 miles, roughly 30 to 40 miles a year for the first 10 years of the program. As I showed at the very beginning, we had those defects in the sewer system. Basically, prior to lining, our sewer system acts as a French drain. So it's taking everyone's groundwater, sending it down the pipeline, and eventually gets into the sewer system or backs up somewhere else. But that sewer system is everyone's French drain. So as we line our sewer system, and now actually line laterals too, that French drain is no longer available. So when the French drain is no longer available, the groundwater table is going to come up. Early on in my experiences here at the district, there was a couple of cases where we actually got complaints from residents that I didn't have groundwater in my basement, but now I do. And the only thing we did was line the sewer. We didn't even touch the laterals at that point in time in some cases. So the water's got to go somewhere. It goes back to that water cycle analogy. We're not just getting rid of it. It can't just wave a wand. So now as we line our sewer system and that groundwater table comes up, it's either going to go back into a system through the lateral if we hadn't lined the lateral already, but now that is our new policy going forward, or it has to come out through a foundation drain. Now, we still don't want that water in our system. It's not helping us for consent order or consent decree compliance. So the ultimate goal is for us, which we've done, in a couple different locations early on as a pilot, was disconnect that foundation drain, install a sump pump, and then discharge that water to that town's storm system. So when you take that small pilot study, which we did in 3 small neighborhoods in those towns listed on the screen, West Hartford, Weathersfield, and Windsor, and you apply it throughout most of West Hartford, most of Newington, good chunks of Windsor and Windsor, that's a lot of extra water that's going to get removed from our system and has to come into those storm systems. Now, in some cases, those storm systems don't exist, which then means, do we just discharge outside, or do we have to have the town extend a storm system? But eventually that water, like I pointed before, it's going to end up in the Hartford flood control system from those towns. So as Scott mentioned, we're doing a drainage study in North Branch Park River area. The main point of that study is it's got 2 components. It's what do we need to do for separation to have full CSO elimination for those 2 CSOs, N2 and N4 that were shown in those pictures, but also what drainage infrastructure and flood control infrastructure needs to exist. It's in order to take for that separation to function. We don't want to separate this system, eliminate the CSO, and then basically still have, have the water have nowhere to go. In similar fashion, as a result of what's called Tunnel Contract 4, which is basically the CSOs to Cove, being paused, we are doing a similar drainage study in the Franklin Avenue area. That's in our consent order that's due by the end of 2027. So the scope of that is going to be very similar to North Branch, where what separation do we have to do to eliminate CSOs and where can that water go? So that's the Hartford component. Obviously, that concept will eventually be applied throughout Hartford, but those are the two focus areas right now because those are the CSOs that are high priority in the consent order. Outside of Hartford, it's the only way to comply with our consent decree fully is to get the water out of our system. Now, we can only line so much. As Scott mentioned, it's not going to completely solve the problem. That water will eventually find its way in. Now, we can line the main line, we can line the laterals, but as the groundwater table comes up, it's going to come in through foundation drains. We've actually had lining projects where we had problems with a section of mainline sewer because of the volume of water coming in through a gravity foundation drain. So it's not a small problem. Now, it's some properties you may not see anything, but a lot of properties are a lot of water. So the pictures on the right are the before and after. The before is the existing pit in the basement, which most residents don't understand even what that is. And then the picture on the right is, okay, we go ahead, disconnect that pit or disconnect the foundation drain from that pit, reroute it to a new pit, and then you've got the sump pump. Now, obviously, this involves coordination with the towns on multiple different levels, whether it be, do I have a home for this water? Can it go into a storm drain? Is that there? Does the storm drain need to be extended? If so, how? And then, you also have to have all this work get permitted by the local building department. So sometimes that becomes a challenge. Obviously, you don't want, if the stormwater doesn't have a storm drain to go to, then in some cases you can discharge to a yard, but in a lot of cases you can't because it becomes a nuisance issue. And that's kind of the rock and the hard place that we're up against in a lot of these scenarios that we've been working with your building departments on. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Chris Levesque, our COO.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thanks, Jason. Again, Chris Levesque with the MDC. Just going to go over some of the opportunities that we've had to addressing and finding solutions that are new to how we address this. So Jason went over some of the historical opportunities we had. So with our backwater valve program, our private property inflow disconnect, where we're getting that groundwater out of our sanitary sewer system, so reducing that wet flow, and as well as lining the sewers, addressing sewer laterals, and ultimately sewer separation projects in Hartford. All this is with the intent of, Jason had the slide a few slides ago, is closing that gap. So for instance, in West Hartford, dry weather day, it's about 8 MGD. What we would see coming through our collection system on a wet weather day, we would see up to over 65 MGD. So the intent of this is closing that gap and then finding opportunities to do that. So what we're looking at is when there's opportunities, specifically even with developments now, is how can we promote separation and removing some of that inflow and infiltration that's going to be directed to our system as part of that development. And this case on 31 Kenyon Street in Hartford, it was a smaller site. All the groundwater, actually all the site drainage was coming in. It was actually being directed across the street and down to a separated storm system. The intent of it was through the city ordinances to collect it on site, but the only infrastructure that was available on Kenyon Street was a combined sewer. So looking at this and what our requirements are as part of our NEPDES permit is we can't introduce new inflow sources. So we actually are teaming up with the developer right now to install a public storm drain on this site. And part of this is as what MDC has understanding of where those drains need to go across the city of Hartford. So we evaluated this site to say, well, ultimately to serve the larger drainage basin, a 24-inch pipe would be applicable for this area. But ultimately, the site only required about a 15-inch discharge for that. So part of this is looking at this and identifying cost-sharing opportunities to address a larger problem at an individual site level, which is important. ultimately we'll be able to capture that water coming off the street as well. Moving on to the second opportunity was a recent development that's ongoing, is approved in West Hartford, is 1700 Asylum Avenue in West Hartford. This is a new site. Currently, 0 discharges from this site. Again, this is a separated community in West Hartford, so separated storm, separated sanitary sewer. So based on this site, they're going to be discharging almost 68,000 gallons of per day of sanitary sewage to our sanitary sewer system. But as you saw in the previous slide, on a wet day, that sanitary sewer goes from 8 MGD to 65 MGD. So, and ultimately comes into the center trunk sewer, not far from this site. Ultimately, that causes issues for property owners along that area, as well as MDC in maintaining and ultimately meeting our consent decree. So the idea was to, how can we accept this and support the development, but also make sure there's no increases into the damages and also impacts to our customers and your residents with supporting this. So we looked at this and then ultimately determined that if we can work with the developer and find an opportunity where the cost of removing that new inflow from other sources, so there's no increase into what we would perceive on a wet day, was ultimately the solution. So that was the case for this one. And then ultimately on another development in Hartford is Arrowhead and Flatiron redevelopment site. This was a case where that development was able to meet the requirements of the City of Hartford's planning and zoning for no net increase on, and as far as discharge rate, they were able to meet the stormwater quality requirements. But ultimately, MDC knew at some point, as far as our consent order, is that we needed to separate this area. So teaming up with the developer and understanding, can we put a storm drain in there, and how would that affect positively the site? Now, this site was able to, in coordination with the City of Hartford Planning and Zoning, ultimately to reduce the size of their detention because there's an existing or soon to be a proposed storm drain that they can actually discharge to, which allowed them to go from essentially a 100-year detention system down to a 10-year detention system for peak discharge rates. So this was a significant cost reduction for their site development, as well as it also freed up valuable space on the site as well for the developer. So these are a number of the scenarios that we do have. Just quickly go through.
Chris, I'm sorry. Before you, I just want to make this point. We use these examples as good examples, right? Working with the cities, West Hartford and Hartford. But this exists. This is happening in Newington. This is happening in Wethersfield. This is not this is a problem for everyone. And he or she who has storm systems that can allow development will have more tax receipts than the other towns. And the MDC can't solve this problem in the 7 towns. We're going to solve it in Hartford over time, but we're not going to solve this problem in the other 7 towns. So this is an example of how, and I give West Hartford credit because they've stepped up and they've identified $300 million worth of stormwater work. They've hired CDM. They're moving forward with a stormwater management plan. But our towns have got to realize that this is just the start of MDC saying, we can't accept your development into our sewer system, not because of dry weather, but because of wet weather flow. And so this is good solutions. These are individual solutions, but there are situations that are arising that there won't be an answer to it. There won't be a solution to it. And that's where the towns have to worry about the expansion of their town, the development of their town, and how it's being dictated by stormwater infrastructure. Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, no, thanks, Scott. And just a summary, Jason covered a bunch of this, but we do as Scott mentioned, we're continually looking at these opportunities across all the towns, and working with the town public works and engineering departments to identify those opportunities where there could be an area where we can support this and ultimately meet both beneficial opportunities. So I'm going to hand it over to Scott, and thank you very much.
So I have 3 slides, and then I'm going to ask Matt Hart to talk a little bit from CROG. I'm going to whiz through these because I've already said a lot of this stuff, so I'm just going to highlight. I don't know who's got the clicker over there, but I'm just going to highlight. I've already said this stuff, right? But it's really important. Thank you, Julie. Thank you. We've already spent $1.8 billion, and we're addressing wet weather flow. We're addressing collecting what's coming to us, not removing it. And we're just going to we'll keep doing this, and we'll keep spending money, but we're not addressing the long-term problem. And so I think we really need to, as I've said before, just imagine if we spent $1.8 billion in all of our 8 towns on putting in storm systems. We wouldn't have built the plant. You know, we spent $1.8 billion, and only 1.4 to 1.5 billion of that was making things bigger, making the plant bigger, making CSO tunnels, making pipes bigger, but only 300 million of it was doing separation work. And now we've got the regulators realizing that that's the wrong solution, North Hartford, so we're moving forward. But this is a really important time for our towns to think about this. The next slide is just, again, reiterating the very fact, right? So in the 80s, we were using 80 some odd MGD drinking water. So it should match up with the dry weather flow coming to the plant. The plant size for 80 MGD. Here, just on our member towns, we're really only sending 28 MGD. We're drinking utilizing 28 MGD a day from our towns. But so that should be coming to the plant, right? Because the rest of it is watering your yard and doing those kinds of things, functional things with water. But so where's the rest of the water coming from? Even on a dry day, it's 60 MGD. Well, it's got to be from groundwater tables. I've said this 1,000 times. In Newington, the groundwater table is 8 feet above our sewer pipe. So obviously, people in Newington have to pump water out of their basements just to keep a dry basement. So it's not going away. It's only going to get worse. And then the last one, which is probably the most powerful one, is I hope everybody can see it because I need to look at it because it's too small up there. Everything we've said, here's taxation without representation. Why do I care? Why do I care about Hartford? Why do I care about West Hartford? Why do I care about Weathersfield and Newington? Because the towns that say they don't have a problem, and I'm going to use East Hartford as an example if you don't mind. I don't. East Hartford, this slide shows we spent $1.8 billion, right? And we're treating stormwater in the sewer system. We've calculated how much the stormwater cost is to treat at the plant, okay? So taxation without representation, I'm going to use East Hartford as a good example, Mayor. East Hartford's paying $1.2 million of their ad valorem to treat stormwater every year. And it's just going to keep going up and just keep going up. And they have no control over it. Zero. Imagine if we could take these numbers, 2.6 million for Hartford, $1 million for Newington. Imagine if the towns could use that money, if we could use that money to actually get the wet weather flow out of our towns. That's the important part of this conversation. You're spending money, you will continue to spend money, and the other 7 towns aren't getting a penny. They're not getting any infrastructure out of it. Hartford's getting all the infrastructure because it's a community. They will start to develop. They will have more development. Their tax receipts will go up, and your ad valorem will go down. Well, that's great. That's good, right? But guess what? If you can't develop, you're gonna have to raise your taxes to pay for your share, even though it's a smaller percentage. Don't forget, MDC has had 0% increase in the last couple of years. But as the price of our operation still went up, we still went up $13 million from last year to this year. So as our cost goes up, yes, your percentage stays lower because Hartford's growing, but our budget's still growing. And you're 12% of 200 million, 51 million, but as it grows, you're gonna be paying more, and you're not gonna be having the revenue because you don't have the ability to control the wet weather flow in other towns, or you don't have the ability to expand with development. So with that, Matt Hart,
Thank you, Scott.
Krog, we've invited Matt to come in and talk.
I'll grab the remote from
You got it.
All right, good morning, everyone. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Matt Hart. I'm the Executive Director at the Capital Region Council of Governments. I'm joined today by my colleague Heidi Simokar, who's one of our principal planners at CROG. I previously worked with the town of West Hartford, where I began to learn a lot more about this issue, along with Mayor Cantor and Greg Summer and many others. So CROG, we think we have a role to play here too. I've got a handful of slides I'd like to work through with you and spend most of the time on the last slide. So a little bit about our region. We're comprised of 38 municipalities, including all 8 of MDC's member towns and 30 others. In stormwater management, it's not just an issue in the MDC region. The city of New Britain is really grappling with this, the town of Southington, even our more rural communities like Columbia are struggling with this issue. So as you can see here, we go west to the town of Southington, we go east to the town of Mansfield, and then north to Massachusetts in both directions, serving a residential population of a little under 1 million people, a geographic region of over 1,000 square miles. So very good size by Connecticut standards. So the stormwater challenges in our region, we've already talked about this at length today. You all know these issues very well. The fact that the frequency of these heavy rain events has increased. We've got more impervious cover. Several areas like West Hartford and others have poorly draining soils. We've talked at some length today about the fact that stormwater lines are still directly connected to the sanitary. That was an acceptable practice for decades when our suburbs were built out. Our existing stormwater infrastructure across the region, aging, undersized, or lacking. And many of our communities are struggling to meet their MS4 requirements. So at CROG, we provide a range of services to our member towns, including regional planning and development. And with that hat on, we began to think about a year and a half ago, this concept of a stormwater authority. So the state has recognized the financial burdens associated with stormwater management, and relatively recently, in 21, passed legislation that would allow our municipalities to create a local stormwater authority. And they can establish that as a new entity or assign it to an existing body, like a WPCA. And there are over 1,800 of these across the country in 45 states, but only two in Connecticut thus far. The city of New London was the first, followed by the city of New Britain. So it hasn't really taken hold yet in our state. Understand, the legislation's only a couple years old. Okay, so what can a stormwater authority do? What can a stormwater utility do? What benefits does it have? Well, number one, it has the ability to levy a separate user fee for stormwater management. And as you can imagine, these fees can be controversial, right? They can be called pejoratively a rain tax and other things. But it can be a very, very important revenue source. Can be used for education and planning and infrastructure infrastructure such as the infrastructure we've been talking about this morning, including traditional infrastructure, as well as things like rain gardens and bioswales. There's some great green technology and infrastructure that's emerged over the last couple of decades that could potentially be applied here. Interestingly, with this fee, unlike the local property tax, both private and nonprofit and public properties can be subject to the fee. A limitation set out under state law. The fees can be structured in various ways, governed again by under state law. The most common method is to base it on the amount of impervious cover and runoff. And property owners that take steps to reduce their impervious cover or mitigate their runoff can have their fees reduced. It's an incentive there. So at the Capital Region, we've been awarded a $250,000 grant, a Climate Resilience Fund grant from DEEP. And we're going to use it to conduct a study looking at the feasibility of establishing a regional stormwater authority or utility. So we're going to look at benchmark examples from other states, such as what's existing in Pennsylvania. There's some really good models there. We will look at financing. How can we finance infrastructure? How can we finance operations and maintenance, maybe through these stormwater fees? We'll look at governance structure. How could such an authority or utility be governed? What would be the best model for that? Do we need one across all 38 towns, or would we want multiple serving a smaller number of communities, like the MDC towns? How would we handle operations and maintenance? So we're finalizing the budget and the scope of work with DEEP right now, hoping to execute that in the not too distant future. As part of this, we want to explore partnership opportunities with the MDC and potentially with other WPCAs. I've spoken with Scott just very broadly, very conceptually about potential models, where if we were to create a regional authority or utility, we could potentially contract with the MDC to do a lot of the work, so that our authority wouldn't need to go out and create a large-scale organization. We could manage our affairs through contracts. We could contract with an entity like the MDC to handle construction or even O&M. That's a model we want to take a good, hard look at. So we're hoping to kick this project off in the early fall. We're going to need consultant assistance. We're going to be going out to bid soon for that. We're going to be relying very heavily on that. And right now, we've got roughly an 18-month project time frame here, just to be conservative. So we know our towns, and I've lived it myself, you're really grappling with this right now. We can see a role for the region here to serve the 8 MDC communities as well as the other communities in our region. So really appreciate the opportunity, Scott, to pitch this concept. And once we're ready, we're going to be reaching out to all of our towns, looking for representatives to serve on our technical advisory committee. So happy to take any questions, Scott.
Thank you, Matt. That concludes our presentation. Are there any questions from any of the representatives from our member towns?
How about a commissioner question?
Well, I wanted to get them first, but we'll get to that. Seeing none there, we'll open it up to questions from commissioners. John?
In all of these presentations, I did not hear any reference to the state of Connecticut. And it just certainly strikes me that the state owns a lot of highway that runs through all these towns and has a lot of stormwater discharge that goes somewhere. And it would certainly seem to me that there ought to be some role for the state to be playing, or they need to be involved in these conversations in some manner. So I'm just wondering what's the thinking along those lines?
Chairman. Yes, so Commissioner, great question. And the state DOT is required to comply with MS4 as well. So it's not just municipalities, but the challenge that I think you're referring to is, and we agree with you, this whole issue about stormwater and what's the state's role. We just had a meeting this week with DOT, talking about Pulaski Circle and their responsibilities. It's a state road. They own the storm system in Pulaski Circle. Our position is the state of Connecticut needs to do something because it floods. We all know Pulaski Circle floods. Same thing with Albany Avenue, same thing with Bloomfield Ave. So we agree with you. We need DOT. A lot of these, I think Emily mentioned, a lot of these off-ramps that dump into our cities, you know, I've lived this, you know, with my career. DOT gives you a highway, dumps it off into your city and says, oh, by the way, here's a stormwater that comes with it. So it is a real issue, and we agree 100%. We have to bring them to the table.
Yes, Scott. We've had.
I just wanted to add to that response. Another potential role for the state, and I meant to mention it, I did not. So we might need legislation here. We might need legislation expressly for regional authority. You know, it's an open question as to whether or not we can do that now. And then looking at their user fees, maybe some amendments to existing statutes. So our study will look at that too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've had discussions with DOT, significantly, especially in Hartford on their state highways, and we get nowhere with them. And I guess probably the best approach is through our legislative delegations, and we've done that through the Speaker, and to try to get some kind of cooperation with the Department of Transportation. And you're right. Look at the highway system that comes through the city of Hartford. It all goes into our stormwater system or into our combined sewer system. So that's a strategy that you've been talking about, and we've been trying to enter into those discussions, and not with a lot of success. So you should be able to do a calculation on actually what is being discharged just in Hartford alone, and it runs through West Hartford and every other.
And that's a perfect example. There's more highway in East Hartford. So imagine all the stormwater coming in from East Hartford, from DOT. So, you know, East Hartford is being impacted. It's a great point, Bill, Vice Chairman, that East Hartford is impacted by this stormwater in a different way, but by the state.
Commissioner?
Yeah. Hi, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Commissioner Bush from West Hartford. I have a couple of things I wanted to bring up. The first thing is there's been no discussion today about PFAS or contaminants, and my question is that as we go forward thinking about stormwater separation, or is there going to be any potential future need to treat stormwater runoff? And is that being contemplated in this discussion?
Sure. Yes. So as I said, this starts, 1972, $1.8 billion later. 2008, we started working on our clean water project. So this is the start. This is the beginning of the next Clean Water Act. And so it's just about testing right now. It's just about reporting right now. It's just about doing all these things that Emily talked about right now. But eventually it'll become a regulation. And once they know how bad it is and what the water quality is, Alicia Sharma's here from Rivers Alliance, and she'll be able to tell you the concern of the environmental community and the communities are this runoff has contaminants in it. And how bad is it? And when EPA understands how bad it is, the next step will be treatment. And our position is we're getting away from CSO tunnels. We don't want to build CSO tunnels anymore. We want to get the stormwater out of the sewer system, period. But what could we do? How could we reimagine the $1 billion storm system we built, the CSO pipe? What could we do with that? Well, it could be a stormwater pipe. We could use that as a way, once we clean up and get the CSO and the SSOs out of it, it could become in the future a stormwater pipe. In Providence last week, MWRA, which again serves all of Boston and 60 other communities, their idea is they want to continue to treat the stormwater in their tunnels because it's beneficial to the river. And we agree with that, except it's only a 1-year level of control or a 5-year level of control. So you're always going to have overflows. The community and the public don't understand that all this money we spent is only to handle a 1-year level of control. The Clean Water Act's goal, and the goal is to eliminate CSOs, eliminate SSOs, period. So if we spent $1.8 billion to eliminate a 1-year level of control, imagine what it's going to cost to eliminate them, period, right? So it's a huge challenge, Commissioner.
Thank you. Can I follow up? I have a couple other things, and you can tell me if this isn't the right forum for this, but regarding the Park River, the North Branch of the Park River, so some of the commissioners had the opportunity to take a field trip and to go out and look at it. And there's been discussion in a lot of our board meetings about the difficulty with implementing that project. It's been pushed back and forth between the city of Hartford as their project, and then MDC and now Clean Water Project. It's a mess, for lack of a better term. When we went out there, it's a mess. There's trees everywhere. There's silt everywhere. It's a disaster. It's a big project. And so I guess sort of two parts is what is and I heard you say earlier that the MDC, I mean, your position, it's clearly financially beneficial to spend $50 million on clearing it than $100 million on building a pump station. And so we're working on that. There's discussions ongoing. How would the regional stormwater authority, should it become available, would it assist in helping to implement that sort of project?
So, if I may, Mr. Chairman. So, just think about MDC staff, whether it's operations, engineering, construction, we deal with we're actually acting as a stormwater authority right now. Taxation without representation. We're doing it because we have to. It's part of the Clean Water Project. It's the stormwater silly, right? We're trying to get the stormwater out. So the challenge is we've got a flood control commission. You've got a number of towns that are on this commission that really aren't engaged. And it's going to impact them with a $100 million pump station without them understanding it, but it will if we don't dredge it. So a regional body for stormwater could do exactly what the MDC is doing right now with the Clean Water Project. We're not doing projects everywhere. We're doing projects that have been prioritized based on the goal, right? So we would suggest we do the same thing if we were a regional stormwater authority. We would prioritize, right? We can't do everything, right? But we would prioritize where that wet weather is creating the problem. Where's the bottlenecks that are creating the expenses? That slide that I showed you, that it's costing everybody X amount to treat this stormwater every year in your Avalorem, you don't even know it, right? So it would be, let's prioritize. We could go after the funding, to Commissioner DeBella's point, as a regional body. You could go to the legislature and force the state of Connecticut to the table, DOT. So that's how we would benefit from it.
Can I just
I'm going to break away because we are getting a little bit
off
astray.
subject? Well, thank you, Scott.
Alicia, do you have your hand up?
Well, should I go to the mic?
Yes, please. Thank you.
I just wanted to address the PFAS concern with the understanding that, generally stormwater runoff is a non-point source, right? And so something like PFAS, even addressing that as a point source for drinking water has taken how long now? And you have to have a standard, a water quality standard, in order to have any sort of regulation around it. And I don't see anytime in the near future there being a standard developed for PFAS, a water quality standard that would have to be met by non-point source pollution. So I would say that, and if traditionally, even if there is a standard for it, how that is managed for something like a pollutant like PFAS or even pesticides is to prevent that chemical, just to ban it in general. So being an issue moving forward with stormwater. Thank you.
Thank you. Al?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman, I guess I'd like to talk about what I call the 500-pound gorilla in this room, and that is that who's going to tell the story that the people in this district, when I say this district, I'm not just talking about the MDC, can understand fully and completely what it is that they're talking about. And the fact of the matter is that it's not just your particular town that we're trying to deal with a global problem. I think that one of the real difficulties here is going to be winning the hearts and minds of the people, the constituents in this area. And I guess my question is, who's going to tell the story and tell it in such a fashion that it can be grasped and people can understand the fact that it's not just your local town, that it is going to entail money, and that it is a long-term plan that is going to have to be worked out. There will probably be some immediate benefits that will be shown, but there are going to be some things that are going to be long-term down the road. Because I don't think if we don't do this, then it's going to be extremely difficult for us to launch any kind of effort, because what's going to happen is that people are going to become, once again, extremely parochial. So I just think that we need to focus on how are we going to tell the story so that people understand very carefully what it is that we're about, what needs to be done. And the fact of the matter is that whether we like it or not, we're all in the same boat. Because if we don't, we're going to have some problems. You know, one of the things that I always like to remind people of is Deer Island. You know, up in Boston, they just sat on the problems that they had. And basically what happened is that the feds came in and did it. But the feds did it their way. Basically, it was put under the jurisdiction of a judge. The judge listened to his consultants. They went out and did it. And then he sent the towns a bill. So I think that, you know, it's going to be prudent for us, once again, to understand that we've got to basically work out an environment where we can come to an agreement, understand that we need to cooperate, make sure that we translate this so that our constituents understand. Because once again, it's going to cost them money, there will be some inconvenience, and we don't want to have to fight them along the way. So, thank you.
Thank you, Al. Cal?
Yes, Commissioner Torres. I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what Commissioner Gale and Commissioner Taylor have said, because we have a history already in dealing with the state on these issues. We've had problems with Pulaski Circle. We've had problems with the garage on Capitol Avenue. We've had a problem with the landfill, lawsuits, trying to get the state to meet their responsibilities with the MDC for things that they're polluting and things that they're doing that they have an obligation to, and have in fact at some point in time said they would do, and then renege on these kind of issues. So that's the history of dealing with the state on these issues. And as we look at, for instance, one major issue, look at all of the highways that are going through, you know, West Hartford, Hartford, you know, that is Silas Dean, and many of the others that are state roadways. Have we ever even measured, for instance, the runoff that's coming off of these hundreds of miles of impervious roadways that is coming into the very same towns that are now producing all of this extra water that is coming into the system, into the Hartford system. We don't even know. You know, so these are some of the things that I think we also need to begin to address, measure, to make the argument that something has got to be done from the state level, provide the support to do this regional water authority, possibly, and then have them also, as Commissioner Taylor has said, you know, have the rest of the state and these other towns that are oblivious to what's going on in these other urban areas, you know, that this is an issue that is going to affect that affects the whole state, but in particular creates an undue burden, you know, on those municipalities that are the recipients of all of this excess water that is not being addressed at the source. So, you know, I agree that there's a lot of education that has to take place among the rest of the communities in the state that are not aware or oblivious, or hopefully not that they don't care about what's happening to all of these municipalities and the cost that is incurred, especially in towns and cities that have very distressed communities that wind up having to pay for all of this excess which is created outside of its boundaries.
Thank you, Kyle. Matt, brief?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just wanted to be able to comment a little bit on the education question and the data question. And would turn to Heidi, who'll be running our project, just talk about how we'd work that into the scope.
Sure. What you said is on our mind, and we definitely expect that public education and having user-friendly materials that make the case for why our project will help the communities, how it will help. I expect that will be a part of our scope of work, and I expect we'll probably want to partner with others who can help us communicate that. So what you said, I expect will be a part of our project.
And certainly MDC has experience in that education. If we look back to the two bond referendums that our communities passed overwhelmingly, and especially those towns that were not impacted by the spending of those dollars, but still voted for them overwhelmingly. You know, I find it ironic that you know, our issue here is stormwater, but it's really a really dry topic, and I appreciate everybody coming. But I look at it as a pay it forward. I mean, we can continue what we're doing now, and each and every year, your ad valorem fees will increase forever, and the solution will not be addressed until someone mandates that we have to address it, or we can pay it forward, spend the dollars now to solve the problem so that down the road, 20, 30 years, it's going to take time, that in the end, we're going to end up as our municipalities will be paying less. And I think that's what we have to look at. How can we best serve both our municipalities and the ratepayers in those towns, the taxpayers in those towns, while solving the problems that eventually we're going to have to solve at some point. There's no question that we're going to have to solve it. You know, I'm hoping in the spirit of cooperation we can reach that point and continue this conversation. I think it's one that needs to be addressed. I would also add, for those who may or may not understand, in the beginning Scott said our consent decree, and we spent almost $2 billion on CSO tunnels. Well, it was ours, all of ours, because we were told it was ours. It was not the direction way back then that MDC wanted to go. The direction MDC really wanted to go in the beginning was exactly what we're now doing in the North End. And through the possibility of a regional stormwater authority. So with that, I would ask one more time, are there any other questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Andy?
Yes. Hi, Commissioner Adel here. One other point of, this is a critical part, really, I think, of our upcoming strategic plan that I wanted everybody to be aware of in the room, that, you know, we've asked all our towns to meet with Commissioner Gentile and the rest of the strategic plan committee. And this is a critical part of it. This is something we all have to work on together, and we want all our towns to know, you know, what their focus is. And this would, I think, I would hope would be a major part of it. But thank you for recognizing me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Andy. And I think Chairman Gentile from Strategic Plan is called for a meeting next week? Wednesday. Thank you. Any other questions? John?
Yeah, Commissioner Gale, I just want to throw out one other thought. I appreciated, Matt mentioned that the funding for the, one potential way of looking at funding for a stormwater authority was some sort of a user fee or fee that would be applied uniformly. Nonprofits would pay as well as everybody else. And I don't know if I heard you say the state as well, but I would just, again, throw the state into that mix. As a town coming from Hartford, where we are reliant on the generosity of the state of Connecticut for 51% of our property, which is non-taxable, and we're reliant on the state pilot program, which, depending on the mood of the legislature, they give us either 25% of the real taxes or 35% of the real taxes. I wouldn't want our stormwater authority to be similarly subjected to legislative discretion. So I'm hoping that we see an analysis that shows where the state's paying the same that everybody else is paying. Just throwing it out there. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Anyone else? All right, thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, any concerns, just reach out to us. We'd be happy to address those questions or concerns, and we would be happy to come and address your fiscal bodies or your town councils, should you like us to do that. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, you do.